It was close to midnight when I finally left the office. I'd been pulling long hours lately, trying to finish a big project before the deadline. The company parking lot was eerily empty as I walked to my car, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I couldn't wait to get home, grab a beer, and crash. As I pulled out onto the main road, I noticed how quiet everything was. Even for a weeknight, the street seemed unusually deserted. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. I yawned, feeling the fatigue of the long day settling into my bones. I decided to take the highway home instead of my usual route through town. It would be faster at this hour, and I just wanted to get there as quickly as possible. As I merged onto the on-ramp, I cranked up the radio, hoping the music would help keep me alert for the drive. Little did I know, this simple decision to take the highway would lead me into a night of terror I never could have imagined. If I had known what was waiting for me on that lonely stretch of road, I would have turned around right then and there. But hindsight is 2020, and I was about to learn just how dangerous a night drive could be. As I cruised down the highway, an uneasy feeling started to creep over me. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but something felt off. The road stretched out before me, completely empty in both directions. No other cars, no trucks, nothing. Just an endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the darkness. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard, 12:17 a.m. Sure, it was late, but this was still a major highway. Where was everyone? I tried to shake off the growing sense of unease, telling myself I was just tired and letting my imagination run wild. The moonlight cast an eerie glow over the landscape, making the familiar scenery look alien and threatening. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, but when I looked directly at them, there was nothing there. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. The emptiness of the highway was starting to get to me. I found myself constantly checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights suddenly appear behind me, but there was nothing but darkness. As the miles ticked by, the silence became oppressive. I reached for the radio, desperate for some human voices to break the eerie quiet. But when I turned it on, I realized my night was about to get a whole lot weirder. I flipped through the stations, searching for something, anything, to fill the unsettling silence. But instead of music or late-night talk shows, all I got was static. Channel after channel, nothing but white noise hissing through my speakers. Frustrated, I was about to give up when suddenly, through the static, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a voice, distorted and barely audible, repeating the same phrase over and over. Turn back. Don't stop. They're watching. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This had to be some kind of prank, right? Maybe I'd stumbled onto a Halloween broadcast or something. But as I continued to listen, the voice became clearer, more urgent. Please, if anyone can hear this, get off the highway. They're out there. They're hunting. Turn back while you still can. My hands were shaking now as I gripped the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as a hoax, but the raw fear in that voice sounded all too real. I glanced nervously at my fuel gauge. The needle was hovering just above a quarter tank. I'd need to stop for gas soon, if I wanted to make it home. As if reading my thoughts, the voice on the radio suddenly changed its message. Whatever you do, don't stop. Keep moving. They're waiting at the... The voice cut off abruptly, replaced by an ear-piercing screech that made me jump in my seat. Despite the warnings from the radio, I knew I had no choice but to stop for gas. My hands were sweating as I pulled into a run-down gas station just off the highway. The flickering neon sign cast an eerie glow over the empty lot. As I got out to pump gases, the silence was deafening. No crickets, no distant traffic, nothing. Just the soft hum of the gas pump and my own ragged breathing. I kept glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The station's convenience store looked dark and abandoned, but as I peered through the grimy windows, I could have sworn I saw movement inside. A shadow passing by, there and gone in an instant. My heart racing, I finished pumping gas as quickly as possible. As I replaced the nozzle, I heard a soft sound behind me, like footsteps on gravel. I whirled around, but there was nothing there. Just empty parking spaces and deep shadows. I practically dove back into my car, fumbling with the keys. As the engine roared to life, I caught a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror. A figure, standing just at the edge of the light from the gas station. But when I turned to look directly, it was gone. Without hesitation, I peeled out of the station, tires squealing. As I merged back onto the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just narrowly escaped something terrible. My heart was still pounding as I sped down the highway, putting as much distance as I could between me and that creepy gas station. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see headlights gaining on me, but the road behind remained dark and empty. Just as I was starting to calm down, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the side of the road ahead, was a figure. As I got closer, I could make out more details. It was a person, standing perfectly still, facing the highway. I slowed down instinctively, squinting to get a better look. The figure was tall and thin, wearing what looked like a long, dark coat. But as my headlights illuminated it fully, I realized with horror that it wasn't wearing a coat at all. Its body seemed to be made of shadows, constantly shifting and swirling. As I drew level with the figure, its head snapped towards me with an inhuman speed. I caught a glimpse of glowing red eyes before I floored the accelerator, my tires screeching as I sped past. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the car on the road. I glanced in my rearview mirror, expecting to see the figure chasing after me. Instead, what I saw was even worse. The road behind me was empty. The figure had vanished. Panic rising in my throat, I pressed down harder on the gas pedal. I had to get home. I had to get away from whatever was happening on this highway. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard a sputtering sound from my engine. The car started to lose power, and I felt my stomach drop. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. I managed to guide the failing vehicle onto the shoulder before it died completely. Smoke was billowing from under the hood as I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, on a highway that seemed to be home to things that shouldn't exist. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. No signal. Of course. I cursed under my breath, weighing my options. I could try to fix the car myself, but am no mechanic. I could start walking, but the memory of that shadowy figure made my skin crawl. Gathering my courage, I popped the hood and got out to take a look. The night air was cold and still, and every sound seemed amplified in the silence. As I leaned over the engine, trying to make sense of the tangle of parts, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, coming from the darkness beyond my car's headlights. I straightened up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. And then, my phone rang. The sudden noise in the oppressive silence made me jump. I fumbled for my phone with trembling hands, half relieved to have a connection to the outside world, half terrified of who or what might be calling. The screen showed unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello? My voice sounded small and scared in the vast darkness. At first, there was nothing but static. Then a voice came through, distorted and barely audible. It was the same voice from the radio. "They're coming for you," it said urgently. "You need to run, now. Who is this?" I demanded, fear and frustration making my voice crack. "What's going on? There's no time to explain," the voice replied. "They found you. You need to leave your car and run. Hide in the woods. Don't let them catch you." Before I could ask any more questions, the line went dead. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, as the implications of the warning sank in. Whoever or whatever was out there in the darkness was coming for me. As if on cue, I heard the footsteps again, closer now, and not just from one direction, but from all around me. My blood turned to ice as I realized I was surrounded. Without thinking, I slammed the hood shut and sprinted towards the tree line, leaving my broken-down car behind. As I plunged into the darkness of the woods, I heard something that chilled me to my core. Inhuman shrieks echoing through the night and the sound of pursuit. As I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, I could hear them behind me. The sounds of pursuit were like nothing I'd ever heard before. A mix of heavy breathing, animalistic growls, and something that sounded disturbingly like laughter. I ran blindly, my lungs burning, driven by pure terror. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I couldn't hear them anymore. I slowed down, trying to catch my breath and get my bearings. Through the trees, I could see the faint glow of headlights. Cautiously, I made my way towards the light, hoping against hope that it was a car, maybe someone who could help me. As I emerged from the woods, I saw that the light was indeed coming from a vehicle. But my heart sank as I got closer. It was an old station wagon, parked haphazardly on the shoulder of the road, and it was empty. The driver's door was wide open, and as I approached, I could see signs of a struggle. The seat was torn, and there were long, deep scratches on the dashboard. On the passenger seat, I saw a cell phone. My hand shook as I picked it up, praying for a signal. To my amazement, the phone had bars. But before I could dial for help, a text message popped up on the screen. "Behind you," it read. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the phone, the message was gone. Suddenly, the car's radio crackled to life, startling me. Through the static, I heard that same urgent voice. "Keep moving, they're closing in." I stumbled away from the abandoned car, my mind reeling. What was happening? Who were they? And who was the mysterious voice trying to help me? As I pondered these questions, I noticed something strange. A thick fog was rolling in, seemingly out of nowhere. It crept across the road like a living thing, tendrils of mist reaching out as if trying to grab me. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The fog brought with it an unnatural chill, and as it enveloped me, sounds became muffled and distorted. I could barely see a few feet in front of me. Remembering the warning to keep moving, I started walking along the shoulder of the road, but in the dense fog, it was hard to tell if I was even going in the right direction. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound amplified my fear. Then I heard it. A low, guttural growl coming from somewhere in the fog. I froze, my heart pounding. The growl came again, closer this time, and it wasn't alone. I could hear multiple creatures moving around me, hidden by the fog. I broke into a run, blindly pushing through the mist. Shapes loomed out of the whiteness. Twisted trees, abandoned cars, things I couldn't quite make out. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I had to get away. As I ran, I saw a sign looming out of the fog. "Welcome to Pine Creek," it read. "Population 666. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I was being herded towards somewhere I definitely didn't want to go. The fog seemed to thin slightly as I approached the town limits of Pine Creek. Part of me wanted to turn back, to try and find my way home. But the memory of those growls in the mist pushed me forward. At least in town, there might be people who could help me. As I walked down the main street, an overwhelming sense of wrongness settled over me. The buildings looked normal enough. A diner, a gas station, a small grocery store. But everything was dark. No street lights, no lights in windows, and there wasn't a single person in sight. I tried the door of the diner, hoping to find a phone I could use. It was unlocked. The bell above the door jangled loudly in the silence as I entered. The interior was like something out of a time warp. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner, a long counter with chrome stools. But a layer of dust covered everything, as if the place had been abandoned for years. As I made my way to the counter, something caught my eye. There, on one of the tables, was a newspaper. The date at the top made my blood run cold. It was today's date. But the headline was what really got me. "They return tonight. No one is safe." Just then, I heard the bell above the door jingle again. I spun around, my heart in my throat, to see a figure silhouetted in the doorway. As it stepped into the dim light filtering through the windows, I realized my night was about to get even worse. The figure in the doorway was an old man, his face deeply lined and his eyes unnaturally bright in the gloom. He smiled at me, revealing a mouthful of rotting teeth. "Welcome to Pine Creek, stranger," he said, his voice raspy and dry. "We've been expecting you." I backed away, my heart pounding. "Who's we?" I managed to ask. What's going on here? The old man's smile widened, stretching his face in a way that seemed almost inhuman. Oh, you'll find out soon enough. They're very interested in you, you know. It's not often we get visitors on this special night. As he spoke, I became aware of movement outside. Shadows passed by the windows, and I could hear the murmur of voices growing louder. The townspeople were gathering. I should go, I stammered, edging towards the back of the diner. The old man made no move to stop me, just stood there grinning that terrible grin. I found a back door and burst out into an alley. But as I ran, I realized with growing horror that the town had changed. The buildings seemed to loom over me, their shapes twisted and wrong. The streets had become a maze, and no matter which way I turned, I couldn't find my way out. And all around me, I could hear them coming. The entire town was hunting me. As I rounded a corner, I came face to face with my pursuer, and the true nature of my nightmarish situation became horrifyingly clear. There, blocking my path, was the shadowy figure it'd seen on the roadside earlier. But now, in the dim light of the alley, I could see it clearly for the first time. What I saw made me want to scream, but terror had frozen my voice in my throat. The thing before me was only vaguely humanoid. Its body seemed to be made of swirling darkness, constantly shifting and changing shape. Where its face should have been, there were only those glowing red eyes I'd glimpsed earlier, and a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth. It spoke, its voice a rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We've been waiting for you," it said. "You're the one we need." The final piece. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. But the cold brick wall against my back felt all too solid. The creature took a step towards me, its form rippling like smoke. "Don't run," it said, almost gently. "It will only make things worse." Suddenly, I heard that familiar voice again, the one from the radio and the phone. It seemed to come from a nearby drain grate. "Run," it urged. "Now's your chance." Without thinking, I bolted. I ducked under the creature's reaching arms and sprinted down the alley. Behind me, I heard an inhuman shriek of rage and the sound of pursuit. My lungs were burning as I ran through the twisted streets of Pine Creek. The entire town seemed to have come alive, buildings shifting and changing as I passed them. Behind me, I could hear the pounding footsteps of my pursuer, getting closer with each passing second. I rounded a corner and saw something that made my heart leap. A car, its engine running, door open as if waiting for me. I didn't stop to question this stroke of luck. I dove into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, just as the shadow creature reached for me. As I floored the accelerator, I caught a glimpse of its face pressed against the window, those red eyes boring into me. Then I was speeding down the main street, the buildings of Pine Creek blurring past. But I wasn't out of danger yet. In my rearview mirror, I saw other cars pulling out onto the road behind me, their headlights illuminated in human shapes behind the wheels, more of those shadow creatures. The chase was on. I swerved around abandoned vehicles and impossibly sharp turns, the pursuing cars right on my tail. The voice from earlier crackled through the car's radio. "Head for the old mill at the edge of town. It's your only chance." I had no idea where the old mill was, but as if responding to my thoughts, a dirt road appeared to my right. I wrenched the wheel, tires squealing as I left the pavement. The path ahead was dark and treacherous, but I didn't dare slow down. The headlights behind me grew closer. I could hear the roar of engines, the screech of inhuman voices. As I crested a hill, I saw it, an old, decrepit building looming in the moonlight. The mill. I barely had time to register the dilapidated state of the old mill before I was out of the car and running towards it. The sounds of my pursuers were close behind, too close. I crashed through the rotting front door, splinters flying. Inside, the mill was a maze of rusted machinery and crumbling walkways. I scrambled up a rickety staircase, my feet threatening to go through the worn wood with each step. Behind me, I could hear the creatures entering the building, their unearthly shrieks echoing off the walls. I reached the top floor, gasping for breath. Moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, casting eerie shadows. I was trapped. There was nowhere left to run. As I backed away from the staircase, I felt something crunch under my foot. Looking down, I saw an old radio covered in dust. Amazingly, when I picked it up, it crackled to life. "You made it," said the now familiar voice. "I'm sorry it had to be like this, but you're the only one who can end this." "End what?" I cried, desperation in my voice. "What's happening?" "The cycle," the voice replied. "Every 100 years, they need a sacrifice to maintain their hold on this town. But if the chosen one rejects them, their power is broken." I could hear the creatures ascending the stairs. "How do I reject them?" I asked frantically. "You have to jump," the voice said simply. "Trust me, it's the only way." I looked out a nearby window. Below was nothing but darkness. The creatures were almost upon me. I had to make a choice. With the shadow creatures just seconds away, I made my decision. Taking a deep breath, I ran for the window and leaped into the unknown. For a moment, I was falling through pitch darkness. Then, suddenly, I hit water. The shock of the cold jolted me back to full awareness. I had landed in a river that I hadn't been able to see from the mill. As I surfaced, gasping for air, I heard inhuman shrieks of rage from above. Looking up, I saw the silhouettes of the creatures against the moonlit sky, unable to follow me into the water. The current was strong, carrying me swiftly away from the old mill and the nightmare town of Pine Creek. I let it take me, too exhausted to fight. Eventually, I managed to drag myself onto the shore. As I lay there, coughing and shivering, I saw the first rays of dawn breaking on the horizon. The long night was finally over. In the growing light, I could see a road nearby. I stumbled towards it on shaky legs. After what seemed like hours, a car finally appeared. An elderly couple, out for an early morning drive, stopped to help me. They had never heard of Pine Creek. As they drove me to the nearest hospital, I sat in silence, trying to process what had happened. Was it all just a nightmare? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion? But as we passed a roadside billboard, my blood ran cold. There, in faded letters, was an advertisement I recognized. Visit Pine Creek, a town you'll never forget. I shuddered, knowing that no matter how far I drove or how much time passed, The memory of that night would haunt me forever. And somewhere out there, in the shadows, they were waiting for their next victim. It was just past midnight when I left the office Christmas party in downtown Chicago. The frigid December air bit at my face as I hurried to my car, eager to start the 4-hour drive to my parents' place in rural Wisconsin. I was looking forward to a cozy weekend of home-cooked meals and catching up with family. As I settled into the driver's seat of my trusty Ford Fusion, I couldn't shake off an uneasy feeling. Maybe it was the eerie silence of the usually bustling city streets, or perhaps it was the third cup of coffee I'd had to stay awake. Either way, I brushed it off and focused on the journey ahead. I plugged my phone into the car charger, pulled up my favorite playlist, and eased onto the empty streets. The GPS estimated my arrival at 4:30 a.m. Perfect timing to catch a few hours of sleep before Mom's famous pancake breakfast. As I merged onto I-94, the city lights faded behind me and the vast darkness of the countryside loomed ahead. Little did I know that this routine drive was about to become the most terrifying night of my life. As I cruised along I-94, the familiar landscape gradually gave way to an unsettling emptiness. The highway, usually dotted with the headlights of fellow travelers, stretched out before me like an endless black ribbon. It was as if the world had suddenly decided to hold its breath. The occasional road sign or mile marker loomed out of the darkness, briefly illuminated by my headlights before being swallowed up by the night once more. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard, 1:15 a.m. The green glow seemed unnaturally bright in the surrounding blackness. I hadn't passed another car in what felt like hours. Where was everyone? Even for a late weeknight, this level of isolation felt wrong. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a big accident further up the road and traffic had been diverted. Or perhaps I had somehow missed a travel advisory. I reached for my phone to check for any alerts, but the screen remained stubbornly black. Frowning, I remembered plugging it in earlier. I jiggled the cord, but nothing happened. Great, just what I needed. A dead phone on a deserted highway in the middle of the night. With my phone out of commission, I decided to turn on the radio for some company. As I pressed the power button, I expected to hear the familiar voices of late-night DJs or the soothing melodies of my favorite stations. Instead, I was greeted by an unsettling static that filled the car. I fiddled with the tuning knob, searching for a clear signal, but every frequency seemed to be consumed by the same white noise. Suddenly, through the crackling static, I caught snippets of a voice. It was faint and distorted, but unmistakably human. Danger, turn back, not safe. The words sent a chill down my spine. I leaned closer to the speaker, straining to hear more, but the voice faded back into the static as quickly as it had appeared. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what I'd heard. Was it just my imagination playing tricks on me? Or was someone trying to warn me? I shook my head, attempting to clear my thoughts. It was probably just interference from some faraway station, I told myself. But as I continued to drive, the unsettling message echoed in my mind, mingling with the persistent static that now seemed to pulse in rhythm with my growing unease. As I rounded a bend, my headlights illuminated a solitary figure standing on the shoulder of the road. The sight nearly made me swerve. Where had they come from? I hadn't seen any broken down vehicles or rest stops for miles. As I drew closer, I could make out more details. A tall, thin man wearing a dark coat and hat, his thumb extended in the universal gesture for a ride. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, but something made me slow down. Maybe it was the lingering guilt from ignoring the strange radio message, or perhaps it was the bone-deep weariness I saw in the man's posture. Before I could second-guess myself, I pulled over. The man approached my passenger window, and I rolled it down a crack. "Where you headed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His face was hidden in shadow, but his voice was surprisingly gentle. "Just up the road a ways," he replied. "I'd be mighty grateful for a lift." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. As he slid into the seat beside me, a wave of cold air swept through the car, carrying with it a scent I couldn't quite place. Something old and musty, like damp earth and decay. About 20 minutes after picking up my silent passenger, the gas gauge nudged towards empty. I spotted a sign for an upcoming exit with a 24-hour gas station and decided to pull in. The station stood alone in a pool of harsh fluorescent light, a beacon in the surrounding darkness. As I pulled up to the pump, I turned to my passenger. "It'll just be a minute," I said, but the seat beside me was empty. I blinked in confusion. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't felt the car shift as he got out. Had I imagined the whole thing? Shaken, I got out to pump the gas. The night air felt thick and oppressive, and the usual hum of the pump seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. As I replaced the nozzle, movement caught my eye. A figure stood just beyond the circle of light, watching me. My heart leapt into my throat as I recognized the silhouette of my vanished passenger. I hurried into the store to pay, the bell above the door jangling discordantly. The clerk, an older man with deep-set eyes, regarded me with an unsettling intensity. "Everything all right, son?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Back in my car, I tried to shake off the encounter at the gas station. The clerk's words echoed in my mind. Had I really seen a ghost? I laughed nervously at the thought. But the laughter died in my throat as my phone suddenly sprang to life. The screen lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. "Hello." At first, there was only static, reminiscent of the radio interference from earlier. Then, a voice broke through, distorted and barely audible, but achingly familiar. "Honey, is that you?" It was my mother's voice, but something was off. She sounded scared, desperate. "Mom, what's wrong?" I asked, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Don't come home," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "It's not safe. He's here. Hess." The call cut off abruptly, leaving me in stunned silence. Panic rose in my chest as I tried to call back, but the number was no longer in service. What did she mean? Who was there? I pressed down on the accelerator, torn between the urge to rush home and the warning to stay away. The darkness outside seemed to press in closer, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. My mind raced as I sped down the highway, trying to make sense of my mother's cryptic warning. Suddenly, a series of orange construction signs appeared, forcing me to exit onto a narrow state road. The detour led me away from the familiar route and into a dense forest. Tall pines loomed on either side, their branches reaching over the road like grasping fingers. The headlights barely penetrated the thick darkness ahead. As I navigated the winding road, a fog began to roll in, reducing visibility even further. I leaned forward, squinting to make out the path. Without warning, a deer bounded across the road. I swerved hard, narrowly avoiding a collision. My heart pounding, I pulled over to catch my breath. As I sat there, engine idling, I became aware of an eerie silence. No crickets chirped, no leaves rustled. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then, from somewhere in the depths of the woods, I heard it. A long, low howl that didn't sound like any animal had ever heard. It was followed by another, closer this time. My hands shook as I put the car back in drive, tires spinning on the loose gravel as I accelerated back onto the road. As I rounded yet another bend in the seemingly endless forest road, my headlights illuminated something that made my blood run cold. A car, eerily similar to mine, was pulled over on the shoulder, its driver's side door hanging open. I slowed down, a mix of curiosity and dread compelling me to take a closer look. The vehicle appeared to have been there for a while. A fine layer of dust covered its surface, and weeds had started to grow around the tires. As I drew nearer, I noticed dark stains on the driver's seat and dashboard. My stomach churned as I realized it was blood. Scattered around the car were personal belongings: a phone with a cracked screen, a half-empty water bottle, a map with a route eerily similar to mine, marked in red. A chill ran down my spine as I spotted a familiar keychain dangling from the ignition. It was identical to the one I had. It was as if I was looking at a snapshot of my own journey, frozen in time and tinged with violence. The implications were too terrifying to contemplate. I accelerated away from the scene, my mind reeling. What did it mean? Was I somehow seeing a vision of my own fate? It barely put a mile between myself and the abandoned car when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I was relieved to see another vehicle, proof that I wasn't completely alone on this nightmarish road. But as the car drew closer, an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. It was gaining on me rapidly, the headlights growing larger by the second. I pressed down on the accelerator, but the pursuing vehicle matched my speed effortlessly. Soon, it was so close that its headlights flooded my car with blinding light. I couldn't make out any details of the car or its driver, just two piercing beams cutting through the darkness. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel as I navigated the twisting road at dangerous speeds. Trees whipped by in a dark blur. I took a sharp turn, hoping to lose my pursuer, but it stayed right on my tail, as if guided by some supernatural force. The road ahead forked, and I made a split-second decision, veering left. For a moment, I thought I'd lost them, but then the headlights reappeared, closer than ever. A horn blared, long and ominous, the sound seeming to come from all around me. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any worse, my car began to sputter. No, 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 I pleaded, but it was no use. The engine coughed and died, leaving me coasting to a stop in the middle of the desolate road. The headlights behind me had vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. leaving me alone in the oppressive darkness. I turned the key in the ignition repeatedly, but the engine refused to turn over. Panic rising in my throat, I popped the hood and got out to take a look. Though I knew next to nothing about car mechanics, the air was thick and still, carrying a faint scent of decay. As I lifted the hood, a cloud of steam hissed out, momentarily obscuring my vision. When it cleared, I nearly screamed. There, nestled among the engine components, was a crow, dead, its eyes milky and unseeing, its feathers matted with something dark and viscous. How was this possible? I slammed the hood shut, my mind reeling. The woods around me seemed to press in closer, alive with whispers and movement just beyond the reach of my vision. I fumbled for my phone, praying for a signal, but the screen remained stubbornly dark. I was truly alone, stranded in a nightmare I couldn't comprehend. With no other options, I began to walk, hoping to find help, or at least cell service. After what felt like hours, a flickering neon sign appeared in the distance. Pinewood Motel, vacancy. The sight of it was both a relief and a new source of unease. The motel was a run-down affair, its paint peeling and shutters hanging askew. As I approached the office, I noticed that half the letters on the vacancy sign were burnt out, leaving an ominous Novak glowing in the night. The bell above the door jangled discordantly as I entered. Behind the counter sat an elderly woman, her face deeply lined, eyes sunken in their sockets. "Checking in?" she asked, her voice a dry whisper. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. As she pushed the register towards me, I noticed her hands, gnarled and spotted, with unnaturally long fingernails. I scrawled my name, trying not to flinch as her cold fingers brushed mine when she handed over a key. "Room 13, she said, a hint of a smile playing at her thin lips. Sweet dreams. As I walked to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that every window held watching eyes. I entered room 13, immediately hit by the musty smell of disuse. The decor was straight out of the 70s, with faded floral wallpaper and a green shag carpet. I collapsed onto the bed, too drained to care about the questionable stains on the comforter. Just as I was drifting off, a noise from the room next door jolted me awake. It started as a low moan, rising in pitch until it became a blood-curdling scream. I sat up, heart pounding. The scream cut off abruptly, replaced by a rhythmic thumping against the wall. Thump, thump, thump. Each impact seemed to shake the entire room. I pressed my ear against the wall, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Suddenly, a voice, low and guttural, began to speak. The words were muffled, but I could make out one phrase repeated over and over: fresh meat. The thumping intensified, accompanied now by the sound of splintering wood. Whatever was in that room was trying to break through the wall. I scrambled back, watching in horror as a crack appeared in the faded wallpaper, widening with each impact. A long, dark fingernail poked through the crack, followed by other and another. Adrenaline surging through my veins, I bolted for the door, not daring to look back as the wall began to crumble behind me. I burst out into the parking lot, the cool night air a shock to my system. The motel, which had seemed run down before, now looked positively decrepit. Windows that I could have sworn were intact earlier were now boarded up, and vines seemed to have overtaken entire sections of the building in a matter of hours. I ran towards the office, hoping to find help, or at least my car keys, but the lights were out and the door was locked. Through the grimy window, I could see that the interior was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, as if it had been abandoned for years. How was this possible? I'd checked in just hours ago. A rustling sound from behind made me whirl around. At the edge of the parking lot stood a group of figures, their features obscured by shadow. They began to move towards me with an unnatural, shambling gait. Panic rising in my throat, I sprinted towards the road, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and this nightmarish place as possible. As I ran, I could hear them behind me, their footsteps and ragged breathing growing closer with each passing second. I ran until my lungs burned, the sound of pursuit fading behind me. Just as I thought I'd escaped, I rounded a bend and came face to face with a lone figure standing in the middle of the road. It was the hitchhiker from earlier, his face still hidden in the shadow of his hat. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge of amusement. I skidded to a stop, my mind racing. "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. He chuckled, a low, unsettling sound that seemed to echo in the still night air. "Oh, I think you know exactly who I am," he replied, taking a step towards me. "I'm the thing that's been following you all night, the whisper in the static, the shadow in your rearview mirror." As he spoke, he lifted his head, and I finally saw his face. I recoiled in horror. Where there should have been eyes, there were only empty, dark sockets, and his mouth was a jagged gash filled with needle-sharp teeth. "You can't escape me," he hissed, his form seeming to grow and distort. "You're mine now, just like all the others who've traveled this road." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. But as I moved, the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, casting a pale light over the scene. The hitchhiker's form seemed to waver and distort in the growing light. He let out an inhuman shriek, his body twisting and contorting as the sunlight touched him. I watched in stunned disbelief as he dissolved into a swirl of mist and shadow, dissipating in the morning air. As the sun rose higher, the world around me began to shift and change. The oppressive darkness of the forest receded, revealing a normal stretch of highway. In the distance, I could see familiar landmarks. I was just outside my hometown. My phone buzzed in my pocket, suddenly alive with missed calls and messages from my worried parents. As I stood there, trying to process what had happened, a state trooper pulled up beside me. "Everything all right, sir?" he asked, looking concerned. "We've had reports of a distressed driver in this area." I opened my mouth to explain, but how could I possibly describe the night I just experienced? Instead, I simply nodded. "I'm fine now, thank you." As I walked towards the trooper's car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. The night drive was over, but its shadows would linger in my mind forever. It was just past midnight when I decided to make a quick coffee run. My deadline was looming, and I needed that caffeine boost to power through. Living in the suburbs of Seattle had its perks. Quiet neighborhoods, great coffee shops, and the tranquility of the Pacific Northwest. But tonight, something felt off. Maybe it was the unusual fog rolling in from the sound, or the eerie silence that blanketed the usually bustling streets. As I grabbed my keys and headed out, a chill ran down my spine. My trusty Ford pickup sat in the driveway, a comforting sight in the unsettling quiet. I hopped in, the familiar leather seat creaking under my weight. The engine roared to life, breaking the silence. I pulled out onto the empty street, my headlights cutting through the dense fog. The local 7-Eleven was my destination, just a few miles down the road. Little did I know, this routine late-night drive was about to turn into the most terrifying experience of my life. As I merged onto the highway, the fog grew thicker, obscuring the familiar landscape. The radio crackled with static, refusing to tune to any station. An uneasy feeling settled in my gut as I pressed on, the darkness seeming to close in around me. As I cruised down I-5, the usual bustling interstate was eerily empty. Not a single pair of headlights pierced through the fog in either direction. The green highway signs loomed overhead, their reflective letters barely visible in the thick mist. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. The coffee run suddenly felt like a terrible idea. I tried to rationalize the emptiness. It was late, after all. But on a Friday night in Seattle, something wasn't right. My phone's GPS started acting up, the blue dot jumping erratically across the screen. I glanced at the time, 12:47 a.m. Hadn't it been just past midnight when I left? The minutes seemed to be slipping away faster than they should. I passed exit after exit, each one darker and more forbidding than the last. The landmarks I knew so well were swallowed by the fog, leaving me feeling increasingly disoriented. My gas gauge caught my eye. The needle was dropping rapidly, much faster than it should have been. Panic started to set in as I realized I might not make it to the next gas station. Just as I was about to turn back, I spotted a sign for an upcoming exit. "Last stop for 50 miles, it warned. With no other choice, I signaled and took the exit, leaving the main highway behind. The exit ramp curved sharply, leading me onto a narrow, two-lane road I'd never seen before. Tall evergreens loomed on either side, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the fog. My headlights barely penetrated the darkness ahead. I checked my phone again, hoping for a signal, but the screen remained stubbornly blank. The road twisted and turned, each bend revealing more of the same, endless trees and impenetrable mist. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every so often, I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just shadows and mist playing tricks on my tired eyes. Or so I hoped. The minutes ticked by, feeling more like hours. I should have reached some kind of town or gas station by now, but there was nothing but this endless, winding road. My gas gauge dipped dangerously low, the warning light flickering on. Just as I was about to pull over and wait for dawn, a faint glow appeared in the distance. Hope surged through me as I pressed down on the accelerator. Whatever it was, it had to be better than this suffocating darkness. As I drew closer, the outline of a gas station emerged from the fog. Its neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie red glow over the empty parking lot. I pulled into the rundown gas station, the gravel crunching ominously under my tires. The place looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. Rusted pumps stood like silent sentinels, their digital displays dark and lifeless. The convenience store's windows were grimy, obscuring the interior, but a dim light shone from within, giving me a glimmer of hope. I parked next to a pump and cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. I sat there for a moment, gathering my courage. Something about this place felt wrong, but I was out of options. With a deep breath, I stepped out of my truck. The air was thick and heavy, carrying a faint metallic scent. I approached the store, my footsteps echoing in the empty lot. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. The interior was a time capsule. Dusty shelves, stocked with brands I hadn't seen in years. A flickering, fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting sickly shadows across the cluttered space. Behind the counter, an ancient cash register sat untouched, but there was no sign of an attendant. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and afraid. No response. Just the incessant buzzing of the light and the pounding of my own heart. As I ventured deeper into the store, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something moved in the corner of my eye, and I whirled around. There, standing by the coolers, was an old man. His appearance was so sudden, I nearly jumped out of my skin. He wore a tattered gas station uniform, the patch on his chest too faded to read. His eyes were sunken, almost hidden beneath bushy white eyebrows. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice like gravel. I stammered, explaining about my low gas and the foggy detour. He shook his head slowly, a look of pity crossing his weathered face. "Ain't no gas here, son. Ain't been for years." My heart sank. But the light I saw, the old man's laugh was hollow, sending chills down my spine. Light's always on, draws 'em in, like moths to a flame. Before I could ask who he meant, he shuffled towards the door. "You best be on your way. Night's not safe for traveling." He paused, hand on the doorknob. "And whatever you do, don't pick up any hitchhikers." With that cryptic warning, he stepped out into the fog and vanished as suddenly as he had appeared. Shaken by the encounter, I hurried back to my truck. The old man's warning echoed in my mind as I turned the key. To my relief, the engine sputtered to life. I pulled out of the gas station, my headlights once again the only illumination in the oppressive darkness. The fuel gauge hadn't moved. Whatever cosmic glitch had brought me here hadn't been kind enough to magically fill my tank. I drove on, hoping against hope to find another station, or at least a way back to the highway. The road stretched endlessly before me, each curve revealing only more mist and shadows. Suddenly, a figure appeared in my headlights. A woman, her arm outstretched, thumb raised in the universal sign for a ride. I nearly swerved off the road in shock. The old man's words rang in my ears. "Don't pick up any hitchhikers." But as I drew closer, I saw her face, young, scared, and eerily familiar. She looked just like Sarah, my little sister who had gone missing 5 years ago. It couldn't be her, I knew that, but the resemblance was uncanny. My foot hovered over the brake pedal. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was somehow connected to Sarah's disappearance. Against my better judgment, I slowed to a stop. The woman, no, the girl, she couldn't have been more than 18, rushed to the passenger side. As she climbed in, I was struck by how cold she was, her skin like ice when her hand brushed mine. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine's idle. "I've been waiting so long." I asked where she was headed, trying to keep my voice steady. She just shook her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. Away, anywhere but here. As we drove, she began to talk. Her story was disjointed, fragments of memory and fear. She spoke of a town nearby, of people disappearing, of something dark that had taken root there. With each word, my unease grew. The similarities to Sarah's case were uncanny. The same region, the same pattern of vanishings. I found myself sharing details of my sister's disappearance, words tumbling out before I could stop them. The girl listened intently, her eyes growing wide. "You're him," she breathed. "The brother she always talked about." My heart stopped. "What do you mean? Did you know Sarah?" Her next words chilled me to the bone. "Everyone in Shadowville knows Sarah. She's been waiting for you." The girl directed me down a series of increasingly narrow roads, each turn taking us deeper into the wilderness. Finally, we crested a hill, and a valley spread out before us. In the dim moonlight, I could make out the silhouettes of buildings, a town seemingly abandoned. "Shadowville," the girl whispered, a tremor in her voice. As we descended into the valley, an oppressive silence fell over us. The buildings loomed, their windows dark and empty. Main Street was a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. Cars left to rust, storefronts with faded signs, leaves and debris scattered across the road. I parked in front of what once might have been the town hall. "Sarah's here?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. The girl nodded, pointing to a building at the end of the street. Its facade was different from the others, newer somehow, with a faint light glowing from within. "The gateway," she said. "That's where they take them, where they took Sarah." Before I could ask who they were, the girl was gone, Doctor slamming shut as she melted into the shadows. I was alone in this ghost town, with only my racing thoughts and the promise of answers about my sister. The silence in Shadowville was deafening, broken only by the crunch of gravel under my feet as I made my way towards the gateway. Each step felt like a mile, the air growing thicker, more oppressive. Shadows seemed to move at the corners of my vision, always disappearing when I turned to look. The faint light from the building grew stronger as I approached, pulsing like a heartbeat. A sense of urgency gripped me. I knew, somehow, that I was racing against time. If Sarah was here, if she was still, I couldn't finish the thought. The door of the gateway loomed before me, its surface etched with strange symbols. As I reached for the handle, a scream pierced the night. Sarah's voice. I was sure of it. Without hesitation, I yanked the door open and plunged inside. The interior was a labyrinth of corridors, the walls seeming to shift and change as I ran. Sarah's screams echoed, guiding me deeper into the maze. I passed rooms filled with strange machinery, others with what looked like operating tables. The implications made me sick. Finally, I burst into a large chamber. In the center stood a figure in a dark robe, looming over a familiar form strapped to a table. "Sarah!" I yelled. The figure turned, its face hidden in shadow, and I realized I had just made a terrible mistake. The robed figure moved with inhuman speed, closing the distance between us in the blink of an eye. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall. Cold fingers gripped my throat, and I found myself staring into a face that was both familiar and terrifyingly alien. It was the old man from the gas station, but his eyes now glowed with an unearthly light. "You shouldn't have come here," he hissed, his breath icy against my skin. "But now that you're here, you'll serve our purpose just as well as your sister." With his free hand, he pulled back his hood, revealing a mass of writhing tentacles where his scalp should have been. I realized with horror that this thing, whatever it was, had been stalking me from the moment I took that foggy detour. Every encounter, every coincidence had been orchestrated to bring me here, to this moment. I struggled against his grip, my eyes darting to Sarah on the table. She was pale, so pale, but I could see the faint rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. That knowledge gave me strength. With a surge of adrenaline, I brought my knee up hard, catching the creature off guard. Its grip loosened, and I pushed past, racing towards my sister. I had to get her out of here, had to find a way to escape this nightmare. I reached Sarah's side, fumbling with the straps that held her down. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Jake?" she mumbled, her voice weak. "I'm here, Sarah. I'm getting you out." The creature roared behind me, the sound shaking the very foundations of the building. I managed to free one of Sarah's arms when something wrapped around my ankle, yanking me back. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. The old man, the thing wearing the old man's face, loomed over me, its tentacles writhing in fury. "You cannot escape," it snarled. "Shadowville claims all who enter," but as it reached for me, a bright light suddenly flooded the room. The creature shrieked, recoiling from the brilliance. I turned to see Sarah, her free hand gripping a strange, glowing device she must have grabbed from a nearby table. "The gateway," she gasped. "Destroy it." Understanding dawned. This place, this town, it was all connected to that device. With the creature momentarily blinded, I scrambled to my feet, snatching the glowing object from Sarah. The old man lunged for me, but I was faster. With all my strength, I hurled the device at the far wall. It shattered in an explosion of light and sound. The world seemed to tilt and spin as the device exploded. When my vision cleared, I found myself in a dimly lit cabin, Sarah unconscious beside me. The walls creaked and groaned, as if straining against some unseen force. Outside, through grimy windows, I could see only darkness and swirling mist. We had escaped the immediate danger, but I knew we weren't safe yet. I checked Sarah over. She was breathing steadily, but remained unresponsive. The cabin itself was sparsely furnished, with a threadbare couch, a rickety table, and a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in years. A thick layer of dust covered everything. As I explored, I found a small kitchen with canned goods that had expired decades ago, and a bedroom with a single, musty bed. But it was what I found in the bedroom closet that chilled me to the bone. Dozens of notebooks, their pages filled with frantic scribbles detailing the horrors of Shadowville. Names, dates, descriptions of creatures that defied logic, and among them, a familiar handwriting, Sarah's. She had been here before, had maybe even escaped to this very cabin, but something had drawn her back. The final pages of her notebook were a desperate plea. If you're reading this, destroy the gateway. It's the only way to end this. A pounding at the door jolted me from my reading. The old man's voice, now distorted and inhuman, called out, "You can't hide forever. Shadowville always claims its own." The pounding grew more insistent, the cabin's walls shuddering with each impact. I rushed back to Sarah, trying desperately to wake her. "Sarah, please," I begged, shaking her gently. "We need to move." Her eyes fluttered but remained closed. A crash from the kitchen told me we were out of time. The thing that had once been the old man burst into the main room, its form twisted and elongated, more tentacle now than human. I positioned myself between it and Sarah, grabbing a rusted fire poker from beside the hearth. "Stay back," I warned, my voice shaking. The creature laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "You still don't understand, do you?" it hissed. "This place, this town, it's not just a location. It's alive and it's hungry." As if in response to its words, the cabin itself seemed to groan. The floorboards rippled, wood grain shifting like water. I stumbled, nearly losing my balance. The creature pressed its advantage, lunging forward. I swung the poker wildly, connecting with a satisfying thud. It reeled back, black ichor oozing from the wound. But my victory was short-lived. Tendrils of shadow began seeping through the cracks in the walls and floor, reaching for us with malevolent intent. As the shadows crept closer, a memory surfaced. Something from Sarah's notebook. I lunged for her backpack, dumping its contents onto the floor. Among the clutter, a small device clattered out, similar to the one she'd used in the gateway, but intact. Sarah's eyes snapped open as I grabbed it. "The beacon," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "It can disrupt their connection." I fumbled with the device, searching for an activation switch as the creature advanced. Sarah's hand closed over mine, guiding my fingers to a hidden panel. A soft hum filled the air as the beacon came to life, emitting a pale blue light. The effect was immediate. The shadow tendrils recoiled, and the creature howled in agony. But what happened next shocked me to my core. As the light touched the old man's form, it began to dissolve. Layers peeled away like onion skin, revealing glimpses of other faces, other bodies. I watched in horror as dozens of identities flickered across its surface. Men, women, children. Victims, I realized. Souls consumed by whatever force controlled Shadowville. And at the core, pulsing with a sickly light, was a familiar face. My own. A version of me, twisted and corrupted, grinned back with malevolent glee. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This creature, this town, it had been drawing me in for years, wearing away at my psyche, preparing me to become its next vessel. Sarah's disappearance, my obsessive search, even this night's journey, all part of its long game. But Sarah had fought back, had found a way to resist, to warn me. As the creature writhed, Caught between forms, Sarah struggled to her feet. "The beacon," she said, her voice stronger now. "It's the key to unraveling all of this." I nodded, understanding. With a shared look of determination, we advanced on the creature, the beacon held high. Its light grew brighter, pulsing in time with our heartbeats. The cabin around us began to waver and distort, like a mirage in the desert. The creature let out one final, earth-shattering scream as the beacon's light engulfed it. And then, silence. We found ourselves standing on the side of a familiar highway, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. In the distance, I could see the Seattle skyline. My truck was parked nearby, its engine ticking as it cooled. It was over. But as Sarah and I embraced, tears of relief and lingering fear mingling, we both knew the truth. The long road home was just beginning. The shadows of Shadowville might be gone, but its scars would remain. And somewhere out there, other towns, other gateways might be waiting. Our fight wasn't over. It had only just begun.